Science-based moral reasoning. Editorial published in Medical Hypotheses 2007, 68, 4-8. The Dawn of Science-Based Moral Reasoning. Riccardo Baschetti. Summary. In 1998, Edward O. Wilson discussed the biological basis of morality, pointed out that the analysis of its material origins should enable us to fashion a wise ethical consensus, and predicted the dawn of science-based moral reasoning. This article testifies that his prediction was right. Morality, being based on altruism and collaboration, evolved as a socially advantageous biological phenomenon aimed at ensuring the survival of our species, which was structured in small groups at high risk of extinction for the 99.5% of its existence. In the last 0.5%, the advent of agriculture resulted in a demographic explosion that impaired human beings' moral discernment, because the socially detrimental consequences of immoral actions, which had been recognized and condemned promptly in small groups consisting of a few tens of members, were diluted among millions of untouched individuals, thereby becoming less easily recognizable. Nowadays, to test the supposed morality of individual actions and government policies, we should use reason or, in doubtful cases, mathematical modeling to determine their predictable effects on the survival of small theoretical communities. Unless we untenably claim that the unlikelihood of extinction of today's immense societies entitles us to overturn the meaning of morality, all actions and policies that would cause the extinction of small communities should be regarded as indisputably immoral. This article also presents some examples of science-based moral arguments showing the immorality of restrictions and bans on research with human embryonic stem cells and demonstrates that the old concept of the naturalistic fallacy, which philosophers frequently invoke to dismiss any scientific approach to morality, is no longer tenable, because it increasingly emerges to be a proof of what may well be defined as philosophical fallacy. Introduction. In 1998, in his thought-provoking and riveting essay The Biological Basis of Morality 1, the famous evolutionary biologist Edward O. Wilson, whom an international poll ranked one of the 100 most influential scientists of all time too, pointed out that moral reasoning will either remain centered in idioms of theology and philosophy, where it is now, or shift towards science-based material analysis 1. The subsequent publication of some papers 3 to 14 based on such a scientific analysis shows that the father of sociobiology was right when he anticipated the dawn of science-based moral reasoning 1. In his most innovative essay, Edward O. Wilson also compellingly argued that if we explore the biological roots of moral behavior, and explain their material origins and biases, we should be able to fashion a wise and enduring ethical consensus 1. As the great scientist acutely remarked, the process that will lead human beings to that consensus can be predicted with assurance. It will be democratic, weakening the clash of rival religions and ideologies. History is moving decisively in that direction. And the pace can be confidently predicted. Change will come slowly, across generations, because old beliefs die hard, even when they are demonstrably false. 1. Evolutionary origin of morality. The biological roots of morality can only be explored adequately by adopting an evolutionary approach. Indeed, as the title of an article of the eminent geneticist Theodosius Dobzhansky vividly proclaimed more than 3 decades ago, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. 15. In 1996, in his groundbreaking book Good-Natured 16, the highly respected primatologist Frans de Waal reported that chimpanzees display such moral behaviors as sharing of resources with non-kin, caring and consolation toward non-kin, altruism, collaboration, succor, special treatment of the handicapped, protection of injured individuals, tolerance and community concern. 16. Given that religions and philosophies played no role in the origin of these moral behaviors, chimpanzees' morality can only be explained by purely evolutionary and biological factors, namely, the selective advantages of groups strengthened by the morality, i.e., socially beneficial behaviors, of their members over groups weakened by the immorality, i.e., socially harmful behaviors, of their members. 4. 13. Indeed, as has lately been stressed, Group selection is the strong binding force in eusocial evolution. 17. Not only in animals but also in humans. 18. As shown by mathematical models of population genetics, if the reduction in survival and reproduction of individuals owing to genes for altruism is more than offset by the increased probability of survival of the group owing to the altruism, then altruism genes will rise in frequency throughout the entire population of competing groups. 1. Consequently, it is clear that morality, being essentially based on altruism, evolved genetically thanks to its selective advantages. 4. 13. Indeed, as has sharply been observed, altruists may be less fit than non-altruists within a single group, but groups of altruists are more fit than groups of non-altruists. 18. Notably, as Duvall appropriately recalled, Darwin himself leaned toward group selection when tackling the issue of morality. 16, p. 23. In view of the biological origin of morality in chimpanzees, our closest evolutionary relatives, Duvall wrote that it would be highly uneconomic. 16, p. 64 to assume that morality originated differently in humans, who share 99.4% of their genes with chimpanzees. 19. Therefore, Duvall stated that we seem to be reaching a point at which science can wrest morality from the hands of philosophers. 16, p. 218. This statement proved far-sighted. Indeed, just 2 years later, Edward O. Wilson discussed very cogently the biological basis of human morality. 1. Afterwards, its evolutionary origins were analyzed by several authors. 20. Recently, in line with the scientific view that morality arose as a selectively advantageous biological product of evolution that preceded all religions and philosophies by millions of years. 13. Dilworth underscored that the existence of human values in general, and morality in particular, stems from the biological requirements for the species to survive. 21. Survival and extinction. Survival was one of the principal aims of the ancestral populations in which morality originated to favor it, because they lived in harshly savage environments and were structured in small groups at high risk of extinction. 22. Indeed, these small-scale societies in which humans lived for most of our prehistory. 23 consisted of a few tens of members. 18. All of whom knew each other and recognized easily the immoral actions that could menace the survival of their little communities. 5. 13. Intuitively, the first moral duty of our ancestors was to prevent and reduce the physical and psychological sufferings of the social members, because pains and afflictions, as expressions of diseases and impairments, menaced the survival of the small ancestral groups. 3. 13. This moral duty, unsurprisingly, also guides chimpanzees, as shown by their succurrent behavior, defined as helping, caregiving, or providing relief to distressed or endangered individuals other than progeny. 16, p. 41. Unfortunately, as a result of the demographic explosion that ensued from the advent of agriculture, which occurred in the last 0.5% of humankind's evolution. 13. The original ability of human beings to recognize immoral actions diminished substantially, because the socially deleterious and potentially fatal consequences of those actions were diluted among millions of untouched and unconcerned individuals. 5, 12, 13. Nowadays, therefore, to test the alleged morality of individual actions and government policies, we should use reason or, in doubtful cases, mathematical modeling to determine their predictable effects on the chances of survival of small theoretical communities. 5, 6, 12, 13. Unless we venture the untenable thesis that the improbability of extinction of our enormous societies entitles us to overturn the meaning of morality, all policies that would cause the extinction of small communities should be regarded as unquestionably immoral. 5, 6, 12, 13. The failure to admit the intrinsic immorality of those policies would absurdly imply that either human extinction can be a moral aim or there are innumerable and irreconcilable moralities, which depend on both the different size of dissimilar communities and their size-related risk of extinction. The dependence on this extremely variable risk, however, could hardly be more distant from the universality and invariability that most humans, driven instinctively by their past evolutionary life in small groups for millions of years. 13. Rightly consider to be essential and inalienable merits of morality. Examples of science-based moral arguments. The unlikelihood of extinction of today's immense societies and the widespread inability of their members to recognize immorality. 5, 12, 13 explain why some would-be moral policies are actually immoral, as a sad consequence of the fact that they are based on what has incisively been defined the empty rhetoric of invoking resonant principles with no conceivable or coherent application. 24. The seemingly moral reasons that led several governments to enact stifling restrictions or even total bans on research with human embryonic stem cells, HESC, 13 constitute paradigmatic examples of those vacuous resonant principles. The intrinsic immorality of such restrictive policies can easily be grasped by adopting science-based moral reasoning, which enables us to realize their potentially fatal effects on the survival of small theoretical communities, similar to the real ones of our forebears. 10, 13. Had HESC research and its therapeutic applications been available in ancestral times, evolutionary thought strongly suggests that our forefathers would have deemed it both immoral and absurd to save amorphous and microscopic clots of insensitive cells at the expense of the sick and suffering members of the social group, because the disabling diseases and premature deaths of those members weakened the small community, thereby potentially hastening its extinction. 10, 13. Can we rationally claim that what immorally tends to destroy a small community may be moral in great nations? If we adopt science-based moral reasoning, our answer can only be a negative. There is another theoretical argument that highlights the intrinsic immorality of bans on HESC research. Those who might currently be cured and saved thanks to its expected therapeutic applications, despite being millions worldwide, probably represent less than 1% of humankind. Hypothesizing that this percentage will reach 20%, 40%, or 60%, it can plausibly be predicted that the number of those who oppose HESC research for moral reasons will approximately become inversely proportional to such tragic percentages. Should a day 90% of humankind be affected by a lethal disease curable only by the therapeutic applications of HESC research, one can reasonably anticipate that there will be a virtually universal agreement that the therapeutic use of human embryos represents a moral imperative and that any ban on it would be immoral. This plausible hypothetical agreement, besides disproving the universality and invariability that today's opponents of HESC research peremptorily claim to be inherent to the moral principles invoked to forbid it, prompts us to ask this question: can a ban be either moral or immoral, depending on the number of persons harmed by it? More specifically, can we rationally affirm that a ban is immoral when it lets thousands of millions of people suffer and die, whereas it is moral when it lets only millions of people suffer and die? Once again, science-based moral reasoning impels us to answer negatively. An additional science-based argument, grounded on the fact that maternal care is the most ancestral and perfect form of morality. 13, contributes to expose the intrinsic immorality of bans on HESC research. Indeed, reason suggests that human mothers, driven by evolutionary moral instincts, would overwhelmingly decide to produce an insensitive and microscopic embryo, to be destroyed within a few days, if its therapeutic use can save their suffering children. The unwillingness to take this life-saving decision, besides being presumably quite rare in normal mothers, as suggested by the special mother-child relationships, the strongest ones existing in nature, would constitute an immoral evolutionary nonsense, because embryos, unlike children, represent no parental investment for 13, which is a crucial evolutionary factor. 25. Science-based moral reasoning, therefore, cannot but lead us to wonder why that biologically sound maternal decision, which reflects moral behaviors evolved and perfected under selective pressures over millions of years, is prohibited by laws based on religious and philosophical tenets that can be said to have been invented extemporaneously at the 11:59 p.m. of the evolutionary clock. 3, 10, 12, 13. Philosophical fallacy. While only recently has science-based moral reasoning been proposed as a rational practical means to solve contemporary moral questions. 3 to 14, a theoretical scientific approach to morality is relatively old. 26. Considering that no doubt some philosophers regard morality as entirely theirs. 16, p. 10, it is not surprising that many philosophers usually dismiss any scientific approach to morality. They generally claim that this approach constitutes what they define the naturalistic fallacy, which would consist in deriving values from facts or ought from is 27. In other words, despite the self-evident truth that the social behavior of even the lowest animals may teach us about fostering cooperation and moral behavior among humans 28, many philosophers affirm that human beings cannot and must not infer moral directions from socially beneficial behaviors common in animals, including species that are genetically quite similar to humans, such as apes and monkeys. As Edward O. Wilson convincingly reasoned, however, the posing of the naturalistic fallacy is itself a fallacy. For if ought is not is, what is? To translate is into ought makes sense if we attend to the objective meaning of ethical precepts. They are very unlikely to be ethereal messages awaiting revelation, or independent truths vibrating in a non-material dimension of the mind. 1. The fact that such a moral behavior as altruistic helping toward non-kin has lately been observed in young chimpanzees and in human children as young as 18 months of age, pre-linguistic or just linguistic, 29 strengthens the growing scientific awareness that morality, instead of being attributable to transcendental messages or to alleged philosophical truths, is both genetically determined and genetically shared with our evolutionarily closest relatives. 13. Several philosophers, therefore, by invoking the naturalistic fallacy to criticize any scientific approach to morality, actually commit what may well be defined the philosophical fallacy, which consists in regarding humankind as a virtually divine species that shares no behavioral characteristic with other species. Indeed, considering that even animals may take account not merely of how their companions do behave but also of how they ought to behave. 30, because ought fosters the survival of their species, it is evident that the old concept of the naturalistic fallacy so cherished by philosophers betrays their anachronistically unscientific failure to realize that in humankind, too, ought aims at preventing its extinction. Reason suggests that the fallacious concept of the naturalistic fallacy represents an additional consequence of the agriculture-related demographic explosion that severely impaired humankind's original ability to discriminate rapidly moral behaviors, classifiable as ought, beneficial to the community from the immoral ones harmful to it. 13. Indeed, if humans were still living in small groups at high risk of extinction, it can plausibly be surmised that even a subtle philosopher, without resorting to particularly profound cogitations, would distinguish readily what is moral from what is immoral, because this latter is unequivocally recognizable from its evident potential to jeopardize the survival of his small community. Conclusion. Morality and immorality, far from needing philosophical definitions or metaphysical explanations, simply constitute deeply rooted ancestral concepts, which are indissolubly bound with the two universal biological entities that concern all living species, namely, survival and extinction. Ergo, morality consists in behaviors that favor the survival of the community, regardless of its dimension, essentially by preventing and reducing human sufferings, because these latter reflect diseases and impairments fatal for a small community. 13, whereas immorality consists in behaviors that would tend to cause the extinction of a small community, by deliberately increasing human sufferings or by hampering consciously their prevention and reduction. 3-14. In the virtual global village in which all human beings are living nowadays, survival of the community means survival of our species. As Dilworth correctly emphasized, there exists a biological categorical imperative, namely, to act in that way as best supports the survival of our species. 21. Even though the extinction of our species seems to be an improbable or remote event, this biological categorical imperative should compel us to pursue what, since ancestral times, continues to be the best way for ensuring the survival of our species: individual and collective efforts to prevent and reduce as much as possible the physical and psychological sufferings of our fellow beings. References. 1. Wilson E.O. The Biological Basis of Morality. The Atlantic Monthly, 1998, 281, 53-70. 2. Alabama Academy of Honor, Edward Osborne Wilson. Available from www.archives.state.al.us/famous/academy_wilson.html, 2006. 3 Baschetti R. Use of stem cells in creation of embryos. Lancet 2001, 358, 2078. 4 Baschetti R. Science, Philosophy, Religion, and Use of Embryonic Stem Cells. Lancet 2002, 359, 2037. 5 Baschetti R. Ethical Analysis in Public Health. Lancet 2002, 360, 416. 6 Baschetti R. HIV/AIDS and Human Rights. Lancet 2003, 361, 1056. 7 Baschetti R. HIV/AIDS, A Time to Act. Lancet 2003, 361, 1300-1. 8 Baschetti R. Food Fights, Common Good vs. Individual Interests. CanMed Association J 2004, 170, 1517-8. 9 Baschetti R. Preventing Type 2 Diabetes, An Evolutionary View. DiabetMed 2004, 21, 649-50. 10 Baschetti R. Evolutionary Ethic and Embryonic Stem Cell Research. InternMed J 2004, 34, 371. 11 Baschetti R. The Obesity Epidemic. QJ Med 2005, 98, 319-20. 12 Baschetti R. Evolutionary Morality and Public Health. InternMed J 2005, 35, 372-3. 13 Baschetti R. Evolutionary, Biological Origins of Morality, Implications for Research with Human Embryonic Stem Cells. Stem Cells Dev 2005, 14, 239-47. 14 Baschetti R. Ethics of Embryonic Stem Cell Technology, Science vs. Philosophy. InternMed J 2005, 35, 499-500. 15 Dobzhansky T. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. A. M. Beil Teach 1973, 35, 125-9. 16 Deval F. Good-Natured, The Origins of Right and Wrong in Humans and Other Animals. Cambridge, Ma Harvard University Press, 1996. 17 Wilson E.O., Haldobler Biosociality, Origin and Consequences. PROC Natl Academic Sci USA 2005, 102, 13367-71. 18 Wilson D.S. Human Groups as Units of Selection. Science 1997, 276, 1816-7. 19 Wildman D., Uden M., Luigi, Grossman Lee, Goodman M. Implications of Natural Selection in Shaping 99.4% Non-Synonymous DNA Identity Between Humans and Chimpanzees, Enlarging Genus Homo. PROC Natl Academic Sci USA 2003, 100, 7181-8. 20 Katz LD, Editor. Evolutionary Origins of Morality, Cross-Disciplinary Perspectives. Thorverton, UK, Imprint Academic, 2000. 21 Dilworth C. The Selfish Karyotype. An Analysis of the Biological Basis of Morals. Rib Beil 2005, 98, 125-54. 22 Mace are Fair Game. Nature 2000, 406, 248-9. 23 Boyd R., Gintis H., Bowles S., Richardson P.J. The Evolution of Altruistic Punishment. PROC Natl Academic Sci USA 2003, 100, 3531-5. 24 Harris J. Cloning and Bioethical Thinking. Nature 1997, 389, 433. 25 Garcia Dorado A. Some evolutionary properties of parental investment per offspring in a heterogeneous environment. J. The Herbile 1990, 147, 101-14. 26 Alhoff F. Evolutionary Ethics from Darwin to Moore. Hist. Philos Life Sci 2003, 25, 51-79. 27 Tihan J., DiCarlo C. On the Naturalistic Fallacy, A Conceptual Basis for Evolutionary Ethics. EVOL Psychol 2004, 2, 32-46. Available from www.human-nature.com EP/articles/EP023246.html, 2006. 28 Chase V.M. The Golden Rule Covered in Fur, an Animal Model for Citizenship. AM Sci 1999, 87, 270-2. 29 Warnican F., Tomasello M. Altruistic Helping in Human Infants and Young Chimpanzees. Science 2006, 311, 1301-3. 30 Whiten A. Testimony to Niceness. Nature 1996, 380, 301-2.